Alright guys, so we're going to clean a saddle. I have a Kenton Masters dressage saddle and I have a prestige shaped girth. My horse tends to push his saddle forward terribly and I find that these girths just try and help him keep the saddle back. I also use my Acavallo pads. I've got one on his back and then one between the saddle and the numner. So you're going to unfortunately see my saddle gets quite gunky and on the underneath. And then I'm also going to show you my stirrups. They're pretty cool. I've always kind of been a plain stainless steel Steuben stirrups kind of girl. But I found these Acavallo stirrups and they've completely changed my leg position and my stability on my leg. So I can highly recommend them. And they're pretty cool because you can put I've got the South African flag on there. You can put your own country's flag on there. They do come with your country's flag, which is really cool. So let's have a look. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my stirrups and stirrup leathers off my saddle, and then I'll show you my stirrups as well. Right, so I'm quite fortunate. I'm the only person who rides in the saddle, so my stirrup leathers have got quite a good line on them, so I don't have to guess. So if you look at these Acavallo stirrups, normally your stirrup iron would have the gap where your stirrup leather goes through to the front, which means that when you have to put your leg in, they're hanging like this and you have to turn them to be straight. These guys just hang naturally. And like I say, I'm not quite sure exactly why, but they're absolutely just awesome in terms of keeping your leg position straight. So because they're not metal, I try not to soak them too much, but I like to keep them clean and just kind of, give a quick check. Are they still okay? Are they not? Is there nothing that's torn or cracked or chipped? So I kind of just quickly give them a dunk, and then I just give them a quick wipe and a quick look over. Luckily at the moment we're not quite in muddy season, but when muddy season comes, my stirrup irons at the bottom get very, very muddy from all the mud that gets kicked up in the arena, and my treads also get quite muddy. So that's just kind of, one of those things that you just have to keep an eye on. These guys are not metal, it's a plastic compound. So, luckily in that sense they don't rust. But they do have buckles and bolts and things that you kind of just have to keep an eye on. And because they have this open mechanism here, which tends to, when you do step down in the stirrup, kind of gives way a little bit to help you with shock absorption in your ankles and in your knees. I just kind of like to keep an eye on and check that everything is in working order. So there's those guys done, all set. Now, with my leather, my saddle, the top of my saddle is never very dirty and my stirrup leathers are never very dirty. The things on my saddle that get dirty is because I use the Acavallo gel pad, my saddle at the bottom gets gunky and my girth gets very gunky. So I kind of just always give my stirrups a one over. And the place where your stirrup tends to go is where the stirrup iron goes, so I always check that there's no wear and tear over there. And the other place that stirrups tend to go is on the stitching at the top. And these are prestige stirrups, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check. Yeah, they're prestige ones. So they double stitch, they don't stretch a lot. Unfortunately, even though they say they are non-stretch, they do stretch. So I always swap my stirrup leathers over after every clean. It just kind of keeps them as symmetrical as possible. You'll also notice that I have a million holes in my stirrup leathers. My legs are not quite even, so I tend to want to be able to do half a hole and not a whole hole. Right, so the girth's the big thing that I find needs cleaning on a saddle. I prefer a leather girth. There's nothing wrong with neoprene girths. My big reason for buying this girth is the shape of it and not necessarily the fact that it's leather. Leather girths do take more care. You need to look after them, otherwise they go very gunky very quickly. This leather girth, I'm pretty sure, has been cleaned in the last 2 weeks, and already you can see that I'm having to really have a go at it and scrub off the sweat marks. And I'll show you at the moment in the bottom that you kind of really in the lining have to make sure you get all the hair and all the sweat out. So if you look at the bottom, they have a little lip there, and you really kind of have to get in there, and I find that a finger often works better to get the hair out than anything else. And this little fold here is the one you have to check. You have to make sure that these folds are as clean as possible, because if your horse is going to get girth galls and if they're going to get rubs, it's because of this area here. Obviously you can put a sheepskin over. My horse is not quite that sensitive, and again with sheepskins, if you get pure sheepskin, it's another mission to really look after them. And I'd strongly recommend, if you get a sheepskin, that you rather get 2 and swap them over. Right, so that looks pretty nifty. So in terms of saddle, I clean the top of my saddle very quickly. It doesn't seem to take a lot of strain. It's just to keep the leather as good as possible and as clean as possible. So I'll generally give this a quick wipe down. If I do get gunk on it, it's here where my leg goes, and that generally only happens in winter. And I like to lift up every single flap and have a look and make sure that everything on my saddle is still in good repair. And you'll notice, I'll show you in a moment, in the back, some of the staples are coming out. I had my saddle reflocked end of last year, and I see that I'm going to have to get the saddle fitter out to just redo those staples, but they're not at a point where I'm worried that they're going to completely come undone and put me in a troublesome position. These knee blocks you can pull off, they're Velcro. I find it really hard to get my knee blocks, my thigh blocks in the right position. I've got quite a short leg. I actually would prefer a saddle that's got quite a big chunky thigh block. So I tend to not pull them off, because for me to try and get them back where I had them ends up being a bit of a mission. So the other thing on my saddle that I definitely always double check is my girth straps. It's a dressage saddle, so it's got long girth straps with a short girth. And I don't mind, like sometimes the leather goes a little bit white when it's been in the heat, and that's okay. But your big thing is you need to make sure that where your girth ties up, that the leather is strong, so that if you do end up putting tension on that girth strap, it's not going to snap and put you in a problem. Right, so these have been the easy parts of cleaning this saddle. And you'll notice that I've only, to this point, used water. Now I'm also only going to use water at the bottom of my saddle to scrub it clean and get the stickiness off that the pads leave behind. And then only when that is clean, I switch over to product. It's a weird thing. It's almost like trying to add product to get leather clean makes it worse. Don't ask me why. Right, so because the pad sits in here, this is the part that always gets very gunky. So I always gently lean my saddle like this, and I kind of have a scrub. You'll also notice that I'm still using a soft cloth. I've once or twice been very tempted to have a go at this with a nail brush or a sponge with like scotch bites on it, but I can guarantee you that that is going to do more damage than good. Right, love, now this is my fun part. Love you. But would you like to come and do this? Okay. This often takes quite a while, and I often feel like giving up, just when I've gotten to like a point where it's almost ready to go. I know this seems like a heck of a lot of work just to be able to use a pad. I do a lot of sitting trot, being a medium dressage rider. My horse is super bouncy. He tends to hold in his back. And I've just find that with the Acavallo pads, I know there's been very good reviews about them, and I know there's also been very bad reviews about them. For me, they work. For me, they help maintain my saddle better. They help maintain my horse's back better. The chiros, the physios, everybody who works on my horse can clearly see the difference when I'm using a pad and when I'm not. So, you know, unfortunately it comes with the territory, but I honestly feel that it is very much worth it. Like I said, the worst part about this is you kind of often feel, oh, I'm just going to give up. And then just as you feel, when you give up and you give 2 more scrubs, then the gunk tends to just lift and roll. This might take a while, love. Okay. Fantastic. I've got half the one panel clean plus half the gullet, so we're like almost halfway. Right, one more panel. So when I do clean my saddles, I'll show you guys in a moment, I do double check my flocking. Again, convention says you should have your saddle checked every 6 months. Because I do so much sitting trot, because I have quite a bouncy horse and I'm not quite symmetrical, nor is he, I tend to find that I have my saddle checked every 4 months, which means 3 times in the year instead of 2. And then once a year, we completely pull the flocking out and completely redo it. Just because as you reflock it and it gets compressed and the sweat comes through your numner, you know, the flocking does become lumpy. And the problem with saddles is once you have had lumpy flocking underneath this leather remembers that the flocking has been lumpy. So the leather almost forces the new flocking to become lumpy. So I just find, especially as a dressage rider, you know, you spend a lot of time in your saddle. So it's completely worth that extra once a year check and then reflocking it completely. When you reflock it, of course you're gonna, you know, be without a saddle for a week or 2, depending on your saddle fitter, depending on your area. I've never been without my saddle for more than a week. But again, you know, maintenance of you, maintenance of your horse, maintenance of your gear just makes it so much more worthwhile. And a friend of mine said to me one day, I had a saddle that I really didn't like, and it worked on my horse, but it absolutely didn't work for me. And she said to me that you spend so much money on your horse, never mind the tack, you know, the monthly stabling and the lessons and, oh my goodness, the farrier and the vets and going to shows, that it's just not worth having gear that you don't like. So guys, you know, I know we're not all fortunate enough to have our own horses, and we're not all fortunate enough to be able to pick our tack, but it's really worth the investment. It's really worth saying, well, this saddle is uncomfortable, I don't like riding in this saddle, I'm going to get myself a comfortable saddle. And by getting yourself a comfortable saddle doesn't mean it doesn't fit your horse. You know, the market at the moment is huge, and the chances are, if you look hard enough, you'll find something that works for both you and your horse. So yeah, I've always stuck to that. It's when I got this saddle after that conversation. You know, and this saddle, the Kenton Masters, are not the most expensive. They're probably not the cheapest either, but just because the saddle is expensive doesn't mean it's good. And just because the saddle is cheap doesn't mean it's not good. So, you know, in this sense, I honestly feel we need to learn to trust our saddle fitters and trust our guts as well a little bit. You know, if your saddle fitter gives you a saddle and it just doesn't feel right, speak up. Don't just, okay, fine, the saddle fitter says this is the saddle I need, so this is the saddle I'm buying. You know, you're putting out the money. You're putting in the effort, you are putting in the hours. And if you've got a saddle that you don't enjoy riding in, it's almost as bad as having a horse that you really dislike riding. So it just, in my mind, it's not worth it. It's much more worthwhile selling that saddle and getting yourself something that actually does work for both you and your horse. You know, we're so quick to say, oh, but you know, my saddle doesn't fit my horse, so I need to get a new one. But we often forget about ourselves, and at the end of the day, you're the one spending the money, you're the one spending the hours, you're the one spending the effort. So, you know, if you have your own horse and you have a saddle that doesn't work, get rid of it. Get something that works, get something that you love, get something that you sit in and you go, oh. And same thing with bridles and things, you know. Get a bridle that you love to look at. Get a bridle, if you love bling, get bling. If you hate bling, don't get bling. But don't always worry about what everybody else is going to say. You know, it's different when you're going to shows, then you have to conform to whatever national body you're riding with or FEI rules. But you know, for the most part, if you love bling and you're a dressage rider, get yourself a bling bridle, ride in it at home, and tone it down a little bit for shows if you want to. So yeah, I think we finally got through this panel. Thank goodness. I'll probably find more spots on it that I haven't managed to Yeah, I like that one. I'm a little OCD with things like this. When I start with it, I don't stop until it's done. Almost there, love. Right, so finally managed to get all the gunk off the bottom of my panel. So now, again, I am a big believer in CDM products. There's a reason they've existed since 19 something. It's normally on the bottle. I'm quite sad it's not on this one. Okay, so because my saddle is upside down, I'm going to start with the upside down part. And I've already cleaned the gunk off. So this part of cleaning my saddle is not to clean jockeys off, to clean dirt or sticky parts off. It's simply to protect the leather, to look after the leather, to make sure that the next time it's as easy to clean as possible. I think that's another thing people forget, that the longer you leave your tack without cleaning it, the harder it is to clean next time. And I don't know about you guys, but then I kind of go, oh, I have to clean my tack. No, I'll just leave it a little bit more. I'll just leave it a little bit more. And eventually it becomes such a big mission that you don't clean your tack. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of feel once a week minimum. If you are in the fortunate position to be able to clean your tack after you've ridden, do so. It's just going to make it last so much longer. Right, so I've got the bottom of the saddle done. I'm going to flip it back over. Now, if you have a saddle stand, it makes this process a lot easier. We don't have one at home, so I'm making a table make work. In terms of the top of the saddle, if you're going to a show, do not oil it, because your breeches are going to get disgustingly black or grey, or worse, they're going to get green. They're never going to come clean, and if you're a dressage rider, you're going to slip all over the place. So I do clean it, and I do use the step 2, but where for the rest of the saddle I would quite liberally use the conditioner. On the top of my saddle, I use it very, very sparsely for those exact reasons. Right, so that is one saddle clean. Next up, I'm going to give the girth another quick wipe down with the leather cleaner. And with the girths, you often have like little leather keepers for your girth straps. I try and get in there as much as possible. Try and flip the buckles over, make sure that the leather holding the buckle onto my girth is stable, not worn, not torn. Now for the bottom of a leather girth, I always find this such a tricky subject, because on the one hand, I don't want product on my horse the whole time, especially if they're sweating. But on the other hand, I also want my girth to be well looked after. So you're going to have to decide this for yourself. It depends on your horse, it depends on how sensitive their skin is, whether or not you use a conditioner at the bottom. I'm fortunate enough, my horse is not that sensitive. I can get away with doing it. But you know, if you use a product and your horse comes out in hives, then you need to have a look at it and see, is this maybe the product? Is it maybe something else? Is it maybe the change of seasons? There's a whole host of things that it could be. Right, so leather clean. Next step, we are going to condition it. Right, so I try to put some on a cloth, then condition a part of the leather that I want a lot of conditioner on, and then go over the top of my saddle without adding more. I find that this means that if there's any excess on here, it's already gone into another part of the leather, and then there's very, very minimal on the cloth that's going to end up on the top of my saddle where my legs are going to go. Right, top of saddle done. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the bottom of the girth, because again, I want it to be conditioned, but I don't want excess product on there that's going to end up in my horse's skin. Right, last few bits, and then we can put everything back together. What you'll notice about this girth, I've had a couple of judges comment on it. Even though it's a dressage girth, it has a little flap for a martingale attachment. I've had some overseas judges be quite critical of them, saying that, oh, but a rider with a strap like that, you know, it means that they're using running reins or a gadget or whatever. If you want to, you can cut it off. This is my only saddle, however, and every now and again I do go gallivanting across the countryside, and I want the option of being able to put a martingale on my horse or a breastplate if I feel I need it. So that's the reason I have decided not to cut that little loop off. I think to each his own. You know, don't, again, do what you feel you need to do. Don't always fall to convention. Don't always listen to everything that everybody else says. You know, never bad to get opinions, but listen to them all and keep the good. And if you're unsure, make sure you ask someone who you trust, who's in your life, who you know won't give you information that could lead you astray. Okay. So the last part that I do is with the conditioning is the bottom of my saddle, and because the saddle pads tends to leave so much gunk, I tend to put more of the conditioner on at the bottom to try and protect the leather as much as possible. Again, if you have a better idea, please, please, please comment. I'm always open to suggestions. Right, so that's done. Girth's done. We're going to just flip it back over. You'll notice that when you do put it on, sometimes it leaves a little bit of a white residue. I honestly don't think that that's anything to worry about. Like I say, I'm quite liberally putting a lot on the bottom because of the pads that I use. I want the pads to stick. It's part of why they work. They keep my saddle in place. They stop the saddle from sliding all around. And you know, then they also add a bit of extra cushioning and shock absorption. So I want them to stick. So, you know, again, a small little price to pay for a more comfortable ride. Right, so that is everything clean. Now we've got to put it back together. The problem with these stirrups, it's not a problem, it's just a niggle, is they look different on different sides. And I'm quite OCD. So I like my flags to be on the outside. Some people like the black to be on the outside. It really is up to you. I've done quite a bit of reading, and there's no inside or outside on these stirrups, just as there's no left and right on these stirrups. So to put them on, you kind of have to do quite a bit of thinking. The first thing I do is I take my stirrup leathers and I run them next to each other to try and ascertain which one is the longer one at the moment. Right, so we can see that the buckles are probably about 5 mils difference. So I take the shorter one and I put that on the left side. Because you mount on the left, you often put more pressure on the left, which means you do end up stretching that stirrup a little bit. So I'm going to turn the saddle back up. Take the slightly shorter one. Right, so now you really have to keep a brain here going. I want this stirrup iron to lie like this. I want this stirrup iron to point like this. So I'm going to thread it through that way and buckle it up that way. There we go. And now I'm just going to slide the stirrup iron into its stirrup bar, run it up, and I like to twist them over just to keep them up. Go. So now I'm going to do the other one. Again, I want the buckle on the outside, so I want the stirrup leather to lie like this. I want the stirrup iron to lie like this. So I'm going to thread it through. Buckle it up, slide it through the stirrup bar, run it up, and secure it. Right, so now you've done all this effort to get your saddle clean. Most saddles these days come with a saddle cover. Abuse it. I don't know about you guys, we have 2 cats in the yard. Saddles are their favorite place to sleep. So I simply cover my saddle with its saddle cover. Put the girth at the top and we're good to go. Okay guys, so cleaning boots and looking after your own riding boots. I find this probably one of the trickiest areas because one, long boots are really expensive. I find my riding is better in long boots. It keeps my ankle more stable. But for shows, you want them very blingy, you want them quite bright. I chose, however, for now not to go with patent leather. So I look after my boots in the same way as I would look after any other piece of leather. I do pack them away, especially my show boots, which are these pair. I pack them away very specifically because if you're not careful, they lose their shape and they fall down and they sag, and then it's never fun to ride in them. So the first thing I'm going to do with this pair of boots is just give it a wipe down, trying to mess as little as possible. I try and clean my show boots every single time after I've used them and then just before a show. I just find that it makes the leather last slightly longer. And you know, show boots are a very, very big investment. I think it's a worthwhile investment. You know, it's really nice to rock up at a show and have a nice snazzy pair of boots, and it just gives you that extra little boost of confidence. So I don't, at this stage, I generally, my zips, because they work quite a bit, are quite well oiled and they kind of do their job. And when I'm going over my boots, I always make sure that there's no other little funny nicks in the leather that I need to be giving attention to, or that I need to actually take my boots to someone to have a look at. The biggest part that I always find I struggle with is the scruff on the toe. And then because I wear spurs, often my boots tend to get little nicks where the spur goes. So I always just try and keep quite a firm eye on that. Again, guys, you know, if you look after your stuff and you have it repaired as soon as something breaks or something isn't quite right, they tend to last much longer. So yeah, I just try and make sure I get into all the nooks and crannies in giving it a wipe down. And then again, I'm going to use the CDM, and I'm going to start again with step 1 and then go to step 2. Go. I tend to rub my step 1 into my boots quite a bit more than I do into my bridle. Personal preference, I suppose, but again, you know, these boots take quite a bit of strain. You know, at a show you kind of walk around in them, and I don't know about you guys, I honestly don't change my boots when I'm at a show. They kind of go onto my feet when I leave home, and that's where they stay until I get home after I've looked after my horse again. So, you know, trying to get some extra oomph into them can't hurt. You will also notice that I don't clean the inside of my boots. If they do get very wet, then I'll pack them with newspaper. I just find if you do clean the inside of your boot, your pants never, ever, ever get clean ever again. Okay, so that's step 1. And then we're gonna pop step 2 on them. And again, I tend to work this into my leather a lot more than I do with my bridles. I suppose my everyday boots, I don't. My everyday boots I try and keep as waterproof as possible, especially in Cape Town at the moment. We're having weird seasons. It rains, then it doesn't, then it's dry, then we have a drought. So, you know, the leather of the stuff that I use every day, I try and keep as supple as possible. My everyday boots are dead and dying, so I'll probably have to replace them. But they have served me the last 5 years, which I think is brilliant for everyday boots, especially when they work as hard as mine do. I like to really look after the inside of my boots. When I say inside, I mean this part of your leg that is against the horse. They tend to, for me, take more strain than the side that's not, than the side that's on the outside. I suppose for every person it's personal preference. I have quite a bouncy horse, so I put a lot of friction on that side of my boot. I don't use shoe polish on my boots. I do know that there are people who are, and I have no issue with it. It's just, I think it's a personal preference. I like cleaning my boots like this, and on the day at the show I'll probably just give them another quick wipe down just as I get on. So now for me, the most important part about looking after your boots is how you store them. So if you store them like this, or you put them up straight and you let them flop over, the ankle part of it seems to lose its integrity. So I got myself boot jacks. And these guys have got shape to them, and you'll see that they've got a calf side and a straight front shin side. So all you do is you take the front of your boot, the part that points towards your toe, you take this flat side, put it inside, and you zip them up. And of course my hands are greasy, so my zips don't want to go. There we go. Alright, and so now when I do put my boot in its bag, it's going to stand upright, it's going to keep its shape. You do sometimes, I've seen really, really cool ones where you can put air in them, so you can either pump them up a bit harder if you need a bigger calf space, or you can flatten them out a bit if you don't want to stretch the leather. These ones I find work absolutely perfectly for me. So there's boot number 1. And then we're going to do boot number 2. There we go. So now my boots are all clean. They have got their shape, and I like to keep them in a boot bag. Again, it just gives them that extra little bit of protection. It's nice to just chuck it in your car as well. And there we go. Boots all done.